Welcome back, Rizzo. Welcome back to
Happy
what
to be
Bitcoin
here.
did. Good to see you, man. How are you?
ETF day. We're bullish.
Well, we don't know when this one's going out. It could have been, this could go out in a couple of weeks. So
okay.
if people
Strike
have,
that.
Yeah, we might have been a straight line up or a straight line down.
They're retired already. They're out. They can't.
Yeah, man. And the boomers are in. It's this podcast. It'd be all like boomers listening now.
Yeah, your demographic just aged by like 40 years.
Yeah, they're going to need all the historical context.
You're going to start having programmatic ads for underwear and
little blue diamond pills. All right, man. Listen, good to see you. We've got an interesting topic today. We haven't covered this too much here. We actually covered it in this room for the first time, didn't we?
Yeah, we did with Rob Hamilton.
He gave me one.
Yeah, but I think you've lost it.
No, I've got it. I found it.
Well,
I found the open dime. I don't know how the fuck to, Okay, we're talking about ordinals.
Yes.
Why is it so controversial? Is it controversial? Are we going to get cancelled for talking about this?
Yeah, I think I kind of want to start by just, palate cleansing, rejecting some of the, tropes around this conversation, right? So I think often when you talk about ordinals, you're talking about some really like controversial, tense, like political subjects with Bitcoin. Those would be, what is a Bitcoin transaction? Who should use Bitcoin for what and why? And then sort of the recent partisanship, which has been the collapse of the Bitcoin culture and essentially two warring factions with two visions for its future direction. One of those would be sort of the ordinals, people who see this new creation as a new forward direction for Bitcoin. And the part of the culture that is rejecting that, right? And they're sort of largely at war with each other. And there's the wizards and the laser eyes, the maximalists and anti-maximalists. And I largely think that framing too has like spoiled the whole conversation. So I think like if you kind of start from scratch, what is ordinals and why are people like myself interested in it? I think you have to start by just getting rid of all of that. Let's stop talking about those things. They're not helpful. So I'm interested in ordinals because ordinals opens up a new forward direction for Bitcoin maximalism, and Bitcoin maximalism is something you and I have talked a lot about, right?
Yeah.
It's something that I think is really important. So what is Bitcoin maximalism? It's this idea that, and I think it's a very heterodox idea, that anything and everything that can be built with cryptocurrencies, blockchains, should be realized by Bitcoin, right? That Bitcoin is the full instantiation of Satoshi's invention.
And you've been saying this the whole time. You said this to us. We did this in a previous show. You said it.
Yes. Yeah. And you can read my work.
Yeah.
That's my definition for Bitcoin maximalism. Maybe you have something else, but that's what it is. And I think it's important to understand right now that Bitcoin maximalism is not the main framework for how the world looks at the cryptocurrency industry. Largely, the cryptocurrency industry is viewed from what I call crypto agnosticism or crypto pluralism, right? It's this idea that there are many cryptocurrencies, many blockchains, and they all have different uses. They're all special in their own way. This is a new asset class. And the Bitcoin maximalists are just these, stubborn, angry people who have their ideology, but their ideology doesn't match technical reality, right? That's the current view. And I think it's interesting to look at that view because you can see it reflected in the mainstream in different ways, right? And I think ordinals really, to me, is an attack on that worldview. Ordinals is often described as an attack on Bitcoin, and I think that's a wrong framework for it. Ordinals is an attack on the cryptocurrency ideology, like the cryptocurrency complex, and it materially undermines that apparatus if you really understand what ordinals theory is and how it works and what it is actually doing to Bitcoin as a technology. And so I'll kind of go through like why I think that's the case by illustrating just, how the different, I think, you can think about the different ways that the places of power in the world look at the whole cryptocurrency infrastructure, right? So let's take Wall Street. ETF launched today, right? Wall Street does not have a reason to support Bitcoin maximalism as an ideology, right? They're launching a Bitcoin ETF today. They already have applications in for an Ethereum ETF in July. And the road for
Ripple.
The road for Wall Street is to sell as many cryptocurrency products as they can. They have no vested interest in supporting a Bitcoin maximalist ideology. Okay, flip the page. Washington, D.C. Do they have an interest in supporting the Bitcoin maximalist ideology? I would argue no. You can look at almost every piece of legislation that has been put forward, and there are large, if not substantial, carve-outs for cryptocurrencies by which they are not considered securities, and therefore they can compete with Bitcoin on the open market, advertising themselves, in whatever way they want to the retail public. So Washington, D.C. is also not validating Bitcoin maximalism. Finally, we get to the most interesting point, Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is directionally opposed to Bitcoin maximalism, and they are directionally opposed to Bitcoin maximalism on a massive scale. You want to talk about the Bitcoin ETF, $4 billion going into the Bitcoin today? Silicon Valley has invested in the last 3 years upwards of $70 billion in trying to disprove the Bitcoin maximalist thesis. This last year alone was $10 billion, 2022 was $30 billion, 2021 it was $30 billion. And that thesis is built around this idea called the crypto asset thesis. And this is sort of the root of the current cryptocurrency complex, right? It's this idea that Bitcoin is a single application blockchain that does one thing. It's a digital gold, it stores value, but if you want to do anything else materially in the world of cryptocurrency, you want to build apps, you want to do trade NFTs, again, we can debate the merits of these specific things, but this is their technical justification. They're completely opposed to us. And for the last 4 years, we have been deadlocked in a war against them. And you could look at the VC numbers for how much money is going into Bitcoin VC. Minuscule. You're talking about less than even a percentage point of what's going on the crypto side. So again, why am I interested in Ordinals? Ordinals is an attack on this cryptocurrency infrastructure because it fundamentally disproves the central premise of their thesis, which is that Bitcoin is a single application blockchain. In a world where the Bitcoin NFT market is in any way meaningful, is a world where Bitcoin is now has to be described in different ways. Their description of reality no longer fits what is occurring, right? So let's wind the clock back to January, where Casey Rodomar released Ordinals. At that point, they had the argument Bitcoin was a single application blockchain, and they were largely right. There was largely nothing going on Bitcoin that fit their mental framework, which is launching tokens, launching apps, launching layer twos. That's what they're investing in, right? Flash forward to today, a year after Ordinals has been introduced, Bitcoin has one of the largest NFT markets. There are tokens being launched on Bitcoin. You can argue about their merits, but there's a pretty large collection of people doing this activity. And people are starting to build second layers on Bitcoin at a scale that we haven't seen in a while. So all this is to say that this is threatening to that infrastructure. So Bitcoin, I think the tendency for Bitcoin maximalists has been to turn inward and say Bitcoin maximalism is threatening to our culture because we don't really know how to describe this. Maybe we've been talking about it a different way. But on the other side, the crypto people are just as, so their mental worldview is just as unable to accommodate this, right? And what is this new worldview? I would argue it's Bitcoin is now a competing economy. Bitcoin as an economy can compete for all these use cases that all these other chains have. And in that world, if you are investing in something on another chain, you have a better have a good excuse of why you think that it will never come to Bitcoin. Not that it's impossible, because we've already seen that invalidated, right? In the world of the crypto VC complex, prior to last January, it was impossible and infeasible to launch Bitcoin NFTs, right? We now live in a world where that market is competitive with the infrastructure that they've built up, right? And so,
and it's arguably better as well, right?
I would argue, yeah. I think the case is pretty strong.
You've got to bear in mind, like, I have limited understanding of NFTs. I've never bought one or used one.
But your son has, chain. Right?
Well, but the point I'm trying to get to is that my understanding is that an NFT on Ethereum was really just a hash, whereas you can literally store the JPEG on Bitcoin. Like
right. So I think you can get into the technical merits of like why specifically ordinals are better for the end user than NFTs. And I would, because I've approached this entire subject, I try to from like first principle standpoint, right? So why is Bitcoin better than fiat money to me? It's better for the end user, right? If I store my wealth in Bitcoin, I'll have a higher degree of protection that wealth is going to be saved over time. And my wealth should accrue disproportionately to if I invested in fiat currency. That's why I became someone who was suspicious and not investing in Bitcoin. And I began investing in Bitcoin because it was better for me as an end user. And I recognized that argument. I changed how I was working and I began to articulate that argument. On the NFT side, I think the argument is roughly the same. If you are an NFT user, and again, this is where I think as a Bitcoin culture, we've really tripped up on this. You have to first accept that there are NFT users and that it's better for them to use ordinals than it is for them to use their existing NFTs. You have to look at it from their viewpoints. And I think the failure of the ordinals conversations so far in Bitcoin is that it has been a very insular conversation in which we're talking about ordinals from a Bitcoin perspective, arguing about how different Bitcoiners see it. And we haven't incorporated some of these outside perspectives because from an outside NFT buyer perspective, the NFT market right now, people on Twitter are correct. It has been absolutely nuked. Prices are down 95%. But the case now with ordinals is that, we know that the NFT market has been around for 10 years. And now you have a way to at least conceptually, and again, there's a lot of minutia debate like on these things. You can really argue the technical points to the point that I argue is not very useful. You sort of have to accept that the NFT market exists. The people who in that are conducting that consenting market activity feel like they're doing something important that they want to do, that they enjoy, right? And if they enjoy buying, selling, collecting NFTs, and the end result of them owning that NFT is that they own Bitcoin, that is better for them. If you have a Bitcoin maximum viewpoint and you think everything in the entire world is going to zero against Bitcoin, then my argument would essentially be, why would you stop that acquisition route, right? Somebody could be buying an NFT that is in no way related to Bitcoin. That purchase is not adding a network activity. It's not paying fees to the Bitcoin network. That person is not accruing Bitcoin. Or you can have a scenario where somebody is purchasing an NFT and it's adding fees to the blockchain. It's helping secure Bitcoin. And even in the worst case, if that goes to zero, they still own a corresponding bit of Bitcoin that they can take with them that would accrue in value. So I think that this whole argument comes from a lack of understanding of what I was talking about, of how destabilizing this is to the crypto apparatus, and this rejection of this idea that we can have a crypto Trojan horse, right? So like if you think about how we've pursued Bitcoin adoption, we're very into this idea of like the Trojan horse, right? And what does the Trojan horse model mean? It means essentially we're doing something that we as a culture would otherwise reject or have intellectual issues with, and we're doing it in the name of furthering Bitcoin. I'll give you a couple examples. El Salvador. Many Bitcoiners, including people who you've had on your show, are against governments, the use of government power to further Bitcoin. But in the case of El Salvador, we as a culture have decided that it's bullish for Bitcoin and bullish for the people of El Salvador, for El Salvador to accrue Bitcoin, to buy Bitcoin, and enact laws promoting Bitcoin. And we have supported that Trojan horse on the world scale, and largely most Bitcoiners think positively about that. Another example, the Bitcoin ETF is a Trojan horse for Wall Street. There's plenty of things about the Bitcoin ETF the average Bitcoiner doesn't like. The buyers of the ETF are not buying and holding Bitcoin. They're not holding their own keys. There's no incentive for them to become a positive stakeholder for the network. At the end of today, when the 11 ETFs trade on Wall Street, you will have added 11 large Coinbase accounts to the network. That is the end result of that, is that you will have 11 large Coinbase accounts with millions of people who own that Bitcoin. But we accept that as a culture. We promote that as a culture because it is considered a Trojan horse for Wall Street, because we are convinced over time that the incentives of Bitcoin will win out. That once exposed to Bitcoin, these people will change their worldview and they'll change their behaviors to be aligned with Bitcoin. Okay, the crypto Trojan horse. This is what's really strange about Ordinals, is there are certain people who think and do think that we should reject entirely subverting or in any way undermining the crypto apparatus. And that is a strategic idea that I really don't understand, and I would invite people to question, because we as a culture are so comfortable doing this. This is essentially our adoption strategy, is this confidence in Bitcoin's fundamental incentives, this confidence that Bitcoin works, Bitcoin will grow in value over time, and that any and all exposure to Bitcoin is good. And so applied to the crypto apparatus, why would we want a Trojan horse there? Well, it's an incredibly powerful thing to subvert, because if you're looking at the board again, Wall Street has no incentive to support our cause. Washington has no reason to support our cause. Silicon Valley is $70 billion directionally long ETH Solana. If you're a Bitcoin maximalist and you really think that entire structure is going to zero, they are $70 billion long failing assets. That would be a correct definition of the world. And what I ask the people who have a negative idea of Ordinals is, what do you expect them to do? What do you expect Silicon Valley to do in the face of a rational conclusion that their technical thesis about the cryptocurrency ecosystem is broken? And what the rational expectation that I have is that at the very minimum, they will hedge. They'll reject this idea as long as they can, but they'll begin to hedge. And this is the thing that we've already seen, right? So how do you know that the Ordinals market is valuable and working? Is that you are seeing crypto VC firms. I cannot count the number of people who I have not heard from since 2017, people who used to work on Ethereum, used to work in crypto VC, who have contacted me directly asking what is going on with Ordinals. Because they are as afraid of Ordinals as we are in Bitcoin. And I think we've allowed ourselves to like have our conversation like entirely about our own reaction to ordinals. And what I'm inviting people to consider is that there are plenty of people, there's an entire culture now that like sees this other opportunity. So what is the opportunity that they see? They want to build this crypto Trojan horse. They believe that exposure to Bitcoin is good, that fundamentally the incentives of Bitcoin work, and that if exposed, to Bitcoin, the incentives of that structure will change. And so, really when I began to think about ordinals in this way, it was powerful to me because I don't think we can continue to be deadlocked to Silicon Valley. They are the technical and ideological center of the world when it comes to innovation. In a world where Silicon Valley is aligned with Bitcoin maximalism, which by the way, before 2017 they were, right? You had Balaji Srinivasan and other people who in 2015 walked on stage and said, it's Bitcoin or nothing, direct quote, right? That was their view. To flip them back to that view where Bitcoin and Silicon Valley are aligned and Bitcoin maximalism again is a world where you make meaningful progress with Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And I think if you really want to talk about kind of the missteps of the last era of Bitcoin culture, I think we've really thought that we could go through Wall Street and Washington and make meaningful progress there without interfacing with Silicon Valley. That's become a Cold War. There's no conversation there. There's absolutely no discussion. There's no cross-pollination of ideas. And I think like really when I think back of the genesis of, anti-maximalism or this idea of, whatever ordinals is, this ordinals culture, it's a real dissatisfaction with that break. And it's what I think is like a well-intentioned rebuilding of that bridge. Because if that infrastructure really is $70 billion directionally long into assets that are failing, then they have, in fact, the biggest incentive to change. And capitalizing on that opportunity is massive. So then the question is, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to capitalize on that? Because if you look at the funding that is going into these projects on Ethereum, on Solana, et cetera, it funds developers, it funds development, and it has funded a massive build out in technical infrastructure. So again, we can argue about the merits of this technical infrastructure, but I invite people to think about, like, as we look at these two ecosystems, especially right now where frustration about Lightning is high, there's interest in new L2s. What could we do with an extra $10 billion? The answer is we could focus on what we need to do, which is we need to scale Bitcoin for 8 billion people, right? That's
a different point. The funding is a different point.
What do you mean?
Well, so there's talking about Bitcoin maximalism and what the protocol's for, can be used for, what it can be done, yet done with it. But if you get 10 billion of additional investment into Bitcoin because of that, great, but it's not an incentive to do it. Like I would never support ordinals. I thought, we'll get more development in. I would only ever be like, I'm pro ordinals because I think it's good for the Bitcoin network and good for humanity.
Well, so it is good for the Bitcoin network, and I think this is another.
But do you understand what I'm saying there? In that I wouldn't. There's no incentive in. Silicon Valley might put 10 billion more into development. That's a wrong incentive model for me.
Well, so again, like where has Bitcoin currently struggled, right? So we've struggled on technical development, right? We need to, as people who are building Bitcoin, get to the point where Bitcoin is able to handle a massive influx of users. So the reason that the development community, maybe let me say it this way. Last time we spoke, I kind of laid out a framework for you of like the different types of maximalism, right? So there was essentially 3 types that I laid out. There was the platform maximalism. There were the people who believed that fees were good for Bitcoin, fees by any means necessary. We want to scale Bitcoin and increase the user base. There's the sort of network maximalists who I'd say are the Bitcoin core developers, right? There are people who think that fees will be high. They believe that we need to build top-level structures on top of Bitcoin in order to accommodate all these new people, and they hope that these new things that we build on top of Bitcoin will retain some of the properties of Bitcoin or most of the ones that we like. And then there's the monetary maximalists who have really been the drivers of the conversation, who are really the big opponents of ordinals, right? They see Bitcoin strictly as money. They see any use of the Bitcoin database which stores the transaction history for anything else as a perversion of Bitcoin. And they are now arguing that Bitcoin should change in order to stop what is happening with ordinals, even though ordinals is an in-consensus compatible technology that works with Bitcoin. So the reason that group is now a minority and they have been unable to gain a significant mainstream cultural share in order to enact their change is that the other 2 groups are opposed to them. And so I want to stick with the core developers here, because the core developers have been roundly very consistent on this, right? Like there have been many loud kind of users who have demanded that developers make changes. And what we've heard from Peter Todd, Peter Woola, Andrew Polstra saying that, any change against ordinals would not be good for the Bitcoin network, right? Maybe you don't agree with this, but maybe it's the best way for us to have it. So their view is essentially, what's happening with ordinals is you're allowing people to bid for block space, right? For NFTs, tokens, and these other use cases. And so we don't have to believe that these use cases are good or useful in order to believe that they're useful for modeling how Bitcoin will look in the future and useful for providing incentives for us to build the kind of technologies we need to build. So the other two groups essentially have a tacit alignment now. The platform maximalists say fees are up, great. The argument that Silicon Valley's been making that Bitcoin is failing and is not incentive secure is now provably wrong. We win. Our argument's correct. The Bitcoin developers are saying, sure, you can think ordinals are junk, you can think tokens are junk, but now we have a robust fee market. We have a significant incentive to build top-level infrastructure off of Bitcoin, and there's a real reason for us to do that. And that reason should result in a net investment in what we're doing, whereas previously that really hasn't happened. We've seen that money and capital accrue elsewhere outside of the ecosystem. And so, to the people who are kind of in this camp of because again, monetary maximalism was really the predominant flavor of maximalism for the last few years. So I think a lot of people who onboarded, they're coming in and they were largely sent a message that Bitcoin is different than other cryptocurrencies because we don't have tokens, we don't have NFTs. These things are not Bitcoin. And they're watching Bitcoin migrate into a system that looks like the things that they thought that we opposed.
True. Yeah.
So there's a tremendous cognitive, pressure that's going on there. So I think all this is to say that, we need to think about why that worldview and will not win out, right? So I think we're going to a forward direction where it's very unlikely that there will be any meaningful change to the Bitcoin network to prevent ordinals. I don't even think it would be possible if you could. You'd have to build such a powerful consensus to stop that. And so because of that, and again, I think this was very obvious in the early innings, if you were really kind of paying attention to how ordinals was going to play out. In a world where you can't stop this activity from happening, where this activity is actually good because it directionally forces you to participate in the kind of behaviors you want, then it is a net positive for Bitcoin. I'll give you another example maybe that answers your question in a different way. In a world where the Bitcoin culture follows the anti-ordinals crowd, right, and we encourage development in that direction, is a world in which we are putting money, time, and energy into technology and tactics that aim to prevent Bitcoin transactions. Let's just sit with that for just a second. That means that we're encouraging the Bitcoin developers to put their time and energy and human invention into tactics and techniques that would actively prevent people who want to send a Bitcoin transaction from doing so. The ordinals crowd is making the argument that the Bitcoin technical community should be focused elsewhere, that the forward direction of the Bitcoin technical community should be on scaling Bitcoin, creating top-level infrastructure on top of Bitcoin, such that we can scale to 8 billion people, such that we can have new technologies with different properties, and they're willing to live with the NFTs and the tokens because the NFT tokens and tokens give us the incentive to move in that direction, to invest the developers' time and energy in that positive forward direction of building the things they think we will need to build anyway. And so that is just a huge diversity of worldviews. And I think it's going to be very hard for the people who are staunchly opposed to ordinals to make the argument to the rest of the community that should be the forward direction for Bitcoin.
Well, they are already struggling with that. We've seen
they
that.
are, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't feel like a civil war like the block size wars.
You have many people who are openly right now advocating for forks.
Of course,
yeah.
I don't see that coming.
I don't either, and I think that again, I've answered that on a technical level. On a cultural level, I think it's very hard to make the mental pivot from Bitcoin is freedom money, you can do whatever you want, to someone figured out a very clever way that is not hugely detrimental to the network to incentivize activities that people want to do consensually and that don't negatively impact Bitcoin. Therefore, we should stop them. That's going to be a very difficult argument to make.
No, it just negatively impacts some Bitcoiners or some use cases or
Well,
some
so,
people who've been sold that Bitcoin is X and suddenly it isn't. All of like a great example would be someone like Anita Posh. Okay, she spent a lot of time at her own expense traveling to various countries across Africa, teaching. I think it's mainly women about Bitcoin and understand Bitcoin
And that's
how
like
to use
great,
it.
important work.
Great important work.
Exactly, yeah.
And just suddenly, there's a bunch of people now who now cannot afford to send transactions on the base chain, and we know Lightning hasn't scaled enough. And look, I get it. It's like, okay, we've brought forward the ideas that now means we have to invest in L2 development work and scaling it. I get all that. But there is collateral damage from this.
But I think that my argument to that would be that the idea of getting so the Bitcoin network today doesn't function as it needs to in the future. Therefore, any use of Bitcoin today is only like an effective R&D modeling of how it should work in the future. So to me, there's fundamentally very little difference from you trying to encourage people to develop circular P2P economies on Lightning, knowing that will eventually need to be priced out or go somewhere else, and doing the type of activities about like Ordinals and NFTs provide, where you're bringing different users who are getting exposure to Bitcoin, and you know that those will also be priced out eventually as well and are only a placeholder for what we need to build.
Yeah, I get it.
So I think there's an attachment really to like the present activity and the moral quality. And this is really what I was trying to say about like where did the last monoculture of Bitcoin go wrong? And I use the word monoculture because I think, when we have these big price peaks, you really see the Bitcoin culture consolidate, right? Like now we're in a bottom, right? We're in a down. Maybe some people think a bull market's back. And because of that, we see a tremendous diffusion of narratives, right? There's many narratives competing. And eventually, I think when the price comes back, when we're at all-time highs, we'll have another monoculture. That monoculture exists to basically explain to people outside of Bitcoin what's going on. And the upside of the monoculture is you have a very convenient way to explain Bitcoin. That helps onboard a lot of people. The downside of the monoculture is that we've seen that these monocultures tend to break. We tend to learn new things about Bitcoin, and those new things over time, people have a difficult time accepting that. So one of the analogies that gets thrown a lot with the Ordinals debate is the big blockers. Who are the new big blockers? Is it the anti-Ordinals people or is it the pro-Ordinals people? And I would invite people who are listening to consider like the problem with the big blockers was not that they supported bigger blocks. Like really, we actually have to get that through people's head. And the end result of the block size war was that the winning faction raised the block size. Let's just sit with that. The winning side of the block size wars enacted a consensus block size increase. Okay.
Not exactly true.
That's 100% what happened. Otherwise, you wouldn't have.
It was a block weight increase. But it was a block weight increase, which required no hard fork.
But that's what I mean. And then the problem with the big blockers is that they had a very ideological definition of what they thought Bitcoin should be. They thought it must be a P2P digital cash.
Yeah.
And they were unwilling to accept any innovation that could give them what they wanted in a different way. And this is why I'm saying the rejection of SegWit and the rejection of Ordinals is very similar. With SegWit, you had someone who, in the development community, who had a very beautiful and original idea. It was that we could increase the amount of information that is stored in a block size increased, without a hard fork. And ultimately, that was so unpalatable to the other side that they became a dogmatic group of people who were unwilling to accept an alternative solution to their own problem. So all this is to say is you can make your own conclusion about who you think on this side fits that definition. But the problem with the big blocker is really that they were unable to accept new information and they were unable to deviate from their dogmatic view about what Bitcoin should be. And I think that as we think about how Bitcoin develops and we think about these different monocultures, personally, I think we need to we need to find a way for people joining Bitcoin to have more flexible mental models. The fact that we even might have a group within Bitcoin now that is so kind of focused on certain memes, and those memes are so attached to those being what Bitcoin is, means that we've created a similar problem that we've had in the past. And the end result of that problem that we've had in the past is that Bitcoin forked. Bitcoin had a tremendous split in which a lot of people who use Bitcoin, are now somewhere else, right? Listening to different podcasts, in a whole different reality in which they think completely different things about Bitcoin. I mean all this to say that nobody right now is arguing for an increase in the size of blocks, right? That's not happening. No faction is. But there is a certain group of people, I think, who haven't responded to this new information. They haven't thought very critically about why there might be good arguments that we should support these kind of things that historically we haven't supported. And that there might be like a very exciting future direction in that way. And that's kind of why I started with the whole Silicon Valley analogy to begin with, because I think that, Bitcoin, as we try to get adoption, and the point of like the El Salvador ETF and Ordinals analogy was essentially like, if you approve of your if you approve of making ideological concessions in any of these cases, then what is the difference between them? I just see 3 cases in which we've made ideological concessions in order to promote Bitcoin adoption, and I don't see a meaningful reason why I would oppose one and not the other than my own proclivities. And at the end of the day, look, if you are imposing your own ideological framework that tries to shift Bitcoin's incentives, then maybe like you are the attack on Bitcoin. Maybe it's not Bitcoin that is failing, right? And that's the argument I think of a lot of people right now, is that somehow Bitcoin has failed, somehow Bitcoin is broken. This is all sort of like ridiculous kind of nonsense conversation that this is collapsed in. But I think that's been exacerbated by the cultural infighting, right? You really have like a strong cultural infighting. And that's why I really tried with this initial description to say like, let's get rid of the cultural infighting. Let's get rid of the technical minutia. It is currently fact today that if I send a transaction to the Bitcoin network that includes arbitrary data, ones and zeros that represent a picture of a walrus like smoking a bong, like that will end up in your node on your computer, and I will be able to access a software that has a pointer that says that I own that picture of the skunk smoking a bong, and Peter McCormick does not, and that anyone who uses that software can do that. And if that is valuable to you, and if that will increase Bitcoin's adoption, then I ask you to consider that that is not materially different from these other routes that we've taken to pursue Bitcoin adoption, and then maybe you should allow those people to do that and see where that road goes. Because I think the opportunity down that road looks exciting. It looks like developers who now can't build. There's been so many years now of people building stuff on SANs, on Solana, on Ethereum. They see SBF get arrested. And one of the big travesties of the Ordinal conversation is that I think Casey Rodarmar, who's the only person I said that I would say his name in this conversation, has not been held up for what he has done, which is that he has created an exceptional piece of technology and an exceptional argument about how Bitcoin should function. And he's become a standard that I think we should want developers to meet. As this influx of people who are, again, if you think these things are failing, then what do you think will happen? These developers will leave Ethereum, they will leave Solana, and they will have to go somewhere, and they have to look up to someone. So who is that? And I think Casey Rodarmar has set an exceptional standard. Ordinals had no foundation, no token, no pre-mine. He invented a software that effectively airdropped multi-million dollars worth of NFTs to every Bitcoin user without any consensus change. And that in no way in any argument could be a security, because it's actually, he just numbered the Bitcoins in a row. He figured out that if you just numbered the Bitcoins, you could create a multi-million dollar value NFT market from nothing. The fact that someone did that, the fact that we aren't able to sit here and have a conversation about the creativity that entails, and just what a profound commentary on like the complete like wasteland of crypto development that has tried to pursue that in other ways, is a travesty. Because I think the incentives of this market that he's created, you can't even, like, the ironies here are so grand. Like the ocean mining pool, again, I think they have great technology. I don't want to say anything negative about them, but they are incapable of not mining an ordinal, because the ordinal software works by just numbering the Satoshis, and it will, any block they mine, it will assign one of those Satoshis as being the first. And that will have more market value. They are incapable of living in a world in which those market signals don't impact them. And I think the other thing that people have really missed about ordinals is that these market signals are real. People are responding to them, and they're responding them to very iteratively. People see these bubbles, these pockets. Okay, May, we had this big fee spike, everything went down. October, we had a big fee spike, everything comes down. This is how infrastructure develops and fits and starts, right? When you see something like this. The fact of the matter is, okay, let me give you an example. You're a miner. You find out that you have 200 rare sats, these NFTs that Casey Rodemer created just by numbering the Bitcoin. You can choose to sell these Satoshis for 60 cents, which is their market value. Or you can choose to sell them for $300,000 to people who will willingly pay to acquire those specific, to have a Bitcoin transaction that they can use their pointer to on their software to say that they own a certain Satoshi. Which market signal are you going to respond to as a rational, profit-motivated agent within the network? The answer is you're going to sell the 60 cents worth of inventory for $300,000. And I mean this to say that the market forces for the Ordinals market are real, they're active, and they're going to continue compounding, right? The nature of being an exchange or a miner, an NFT platform, is if your competitors have products, you're going to list them. You're an everything store. You sell whatever people want to buy. And in a world where you supporting the Bitcoin economy now is not just selling Bitcoin, it's selling Bitcoin NFTs, Bitcoin tokens, maybe Bitcoin stablecoins. The full stack of that is a multi-million-dollar opportunity for any business involved in that, right? Because that's how the exchanges, these kind of NFT markets, they think about it, right? Okay, we support the Ethereum ecosystem. There's all these things we can sell. We support the Solana ecosystem. Here's all these things we can sell. What exchange that's looking at what Binance is doing right now, just selling all these other things, is not going to add that product, is not going to think that if Bitcoin is the most valuable and only useful blockchain, that the value of these things wouldn't accrue in Bitcoin. Why would you not want to support that Bitcoin economy? How would you, as a rational, profit-motivated actor, sit down and actually make that decision to say, us as an exchange, we're not going to list those? And the people who are anti-ordinals right now, they're looking at, they're saying, the exchanges are not doing that. It's because you have to create an entire new gateway infrastructure to handle this thing, right? Right now, what's happening is people are sending Bitcoin to exchanges. You're sending it to a bulk account, and they're giving you whatever Bitcoin you come in, and they just give you a random Bitcoin out. And so they're sitting there, and they're looking at people using their exchange who are just mining them all day, who are basically depositing $1 worth of Bitcoin. They get a rare stat, they're taking $100,000 out. How long do you think that loophole is going to take to close? They're going to have to build an alternative infrastructure so that they can associate individual UTXOs with individual customers. That will take time. And my only point in saying this is that if you're looking at the ordinal market right now, and you're saying, haha, Pete's talking here, he's an idiot making this argument, like the fees are low. There is tremendous market incentive for the infrastructure that will propel these markets to continue developing. It's happening right now while you're listening to this. And the next time there's another bubble in this little market, it'll happen, it'll hit some ceiling, right? Where that market won't be able to support the demand. It will go back down. That'll be reinvested in the market. And it's very unlikely that these market signals will continue developing. It would be my argument.
I'm not having to do much talking in this interview, which is, you got really passionate in that last bit.
About?
Obviously, something's pissing you off with this. This has become really important.
Well, no, I mean, I see a fissuring of the Bitcoin community. Yeah. And I see arguments that are propagating. Yeah. And then I think I've been able to present to you in this conversation different views on those arguments.
Sure. I think there's a difference to the block size wars in that I think during the block size wars, you were either a big blocker.
I was not a big blocker.
I'm saying you were either a big blocker, a small blocker, or someone who didn't really understand the merits of each. You just didn't understand. Like,
I don't think that's true at all. I think I believed that the community should have information from each side and should be presented a case from each side. And that at that point where I was editor of the largest media outlet.
I'm not saying you.
Yeah.
I'm saying people generally were either a big blocker or they were a small blocker, or they kind of hadn't made a decision because they didn't understand the merits of each. I'm saying like you generally fell on one side. Okay.
Well, especially as time went on, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I think with the ordinals, there's a large people who are just indifferent.
It'll happen. So the thing is that the market forces are so strong, and the investment on the other side when it comes in is going to be so high. I mean, the next market, if this thesis plays out, if Silicon Valley and the Ethereum complex begin migrating even a fraction of their infrastructure over to Bitcoin, even if they attempt to, even if it doesn't work, I mean, you're talking about the kind of nonsense that you're seeing with BRC20s and NFTs today. It's only a fraction. I mean, you're going to see stuff that's so stupid that like you're going to want to pull your eyes out.
I mean, I think most of it is stupid already.
And it's only going to get exponentially more stupid. Like BRCs are dumb, right? Like it's a token standard that really doesn't work. It's really clunky. I don't know if you've ever tried to use a decentralized.
I've got no interest in it. I know nothing about it. I only pay attention to the stuff I care about.
Well, so the interesting thing is that, yes, you know nothing about it, but the counter argument here is that the exchanges will go with what people are buying, and there's now multiple Bitcoin tokens that have over $1 billion market cap.
Is that true? See, I didn't even know that. Yeah, because do you know what I use? Do you know what I need Bitcoin for? I need to be able to send Bitcoin, receive Bitcoin, store Bitcoin. That's
sure,
all
and nobody is taking that away from you.
No, I'm not saying they are. And this is why I'm indifferent, because it still does it for me now. It's got more expensive, without a doubt. I had a $60 transaction fee the other day. That was high.
That's very high.
That is very high, yeah.
They've come way down since then.
I mean, I was moving a large amount of Bitcoin to cold storage, but, you know, what I'm saying is it's like I am very indifferent because I think ordinals are stupid, but I don't really care that much. I think they are a distraction from creating good money. But do I think they're catastrophic for the network? I don't have enough information to know that. If I was to flip it to you and say, if you were a money maximalist, what is a fair argument that comes from the money maximalists against ordinals? Do you have any arguments? Can you see any valid arguments?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, the argument is that essentially they're using the database for something that the individual node operators have not consented to. But, you know, the counter argument to this, if you extrapolate that into this is an attack on Bitcoin or this somehow fundamentally inhibits the node operators, I would say, you know, look, ordinals is designed so that, yes, your node validates its transactions, but you can freely prune that data, right? Like you can completely get rid of it if you want. And then on the other side, there's nothing that will ever break the consensus, right? So they can only put 4 megabytes worth of data in blocks, right? They're not violating that specific rule set. And so for me, it's very hard to, and even Bitcoin users, right? If you've used the network over the last year, you know that if you put a reasonable fee estimation, like your transaction is going to be prioritized, right? Because it's more dense, right? Like it's less, these other kind of higher, megabyte transactions that the ordinals people are taking are going to be deprioritized. So I think what I would invite those people to consider is that, ordinals may be constructed well enough to accommodate both you and these users. And maybe that is something we didn't expect. Maybe that won't continue. But again, the alternatives that you're proposing is a path by which we try to move the developments of Bitcoin towards Bitcoin, of try to stop these transactions or to try to stop things people shouldn't be doing. And ultimately, Bitcoin is a permissionless system, right? And it's incentive-based. So, the idea that people seem to have that, well, Bitcoin is just money. Well, it's like, well, where do your transaction history go? It goes in the database. Bitcoin is a permissionless database. We used to say about Bitcoin that blockchains were an inefficient database. It is a database. So there's lots of contradictions about what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin can be is a great money, is the best money we've invented. And it just so happens right now, people are using the network for something else, but they're using a resource that wasn't being used. Right? People weren't using the space. I find the argument that people make when they say, this is where you get into the very weird arguments like Bitcoin should scale through altruism, or somehow you'll get to some future where there's no transactions because people are just so, they're like, we don't need to build technology to scale Bitcoin. It will just kind of scale on its own. And I find that very counterintuitive, right? Like Bitcoin, we know, is for enemies. Like it's a system where, no one is guaranteed this access. So yeah, I don't know. I think these arguments that people are making, they're based very strongly in emotion, right? And they're based very strongly into this idea that, we should have a moral stance on how people use Bitcoin or what a transaction is. And I find this idea
hold on. I don't know if it's just a moral stance.
It is 100% moral stance.
No, I don't think it's 100%. I think some of it is a more practical.
Well, I found my point that I was going to make. If Ordinals was an attack on Bitcoin nodes, surely you would admit that the number of people running Bitcoin nodes should have declined. Okay, the amount of people running Bitcoin nodes
I'm not making that argument, though.
Has gone up. So there are more people running nodes now than there were before. But surely if there was an attack on nodes, you would think that the amount of nodes, people running Bitcoin nodes would go down. Or that running a node would become more efficient. Have you noticed as a node operator any change in the...
None at all.
You haven't noticed anything?
No.
Okay. So then you would say maybe that these arguments that these things have been very disruptive to the network...
But that's not an argument I'm paying attention to. I'm not paying attention to that. The only valid argument that I've paid attention to is where people say they.
So why haven't you platformed more conversation about ordinals then?
Because I'm in the indifferent camp. I'm just indifferent. Like I don't like censorship. But at the same time, if I was any kind of maximalist, I would say I'd edge towards money maximalist. But that comes more from a position of like how I do this job and the amount of travel I do, all the countries I go to, and the shit I've seen. And I've seen some awful, terrible shit. Our last trip in when we were in Nairobi was fucking. Parts of that were horrendous. We went to Malawi, it's just had a 44% currency devaluation. Another one's coming. You know, I've seen the impact I've been to Lebanon, which is essentially a failed state. Yeah, we did our documentary in Argentina, which is had decades of high inflation. In my mind, fixing money is a really, really, really important job. Bear with me, let me finish. It's a really, really important job. And for me, I'll come to my main issue with ordinals. My main issue with ordinals, I consider ordinals a distraction from creating the best form of money. And I don't know the long-term impact this might have on creating the best form of money. I think bear with me, I think the idea of rare sats is stupid beyond belief. But anyway, my biggest issue I have with ordinals is actually the behavior of the people who are leading ordinals, who are on purpose trying to create...
But who would you say, who's leading ordinals?
I happily name it out as Udi. I think Udi's behavior isn't one of some... It doesn't come across as somebody...
But why are we talking about specific people? We're a technological movement. We have to talk about technology.
It's a bit more than that. What I'm saying is fracturing and creating warfare within a community, I don't think is conducive to making Bitcoin better. I don't think spending all day, every day, identifying people as laser-eyed maxis as a pejorative and then continually attacking these people all day, every day is conducive.
But you have to be able to separate anti-maximalism from ordinals.
Rizzo.
That's not.
I listened to the whole thing. Okay. You got to let me just say my piece. I don't think it's conducive to the development of Bitcoin and helpful to the adoption of Bitcoin and the growth of Bitcoin to spend all day, every day, creating a term, using it as pejorative and attacking people over and over again and then creating a war. It isn't. We've seen in politics, media everywhere, we've seen a fraction of society from this kind of populist behavior. And to see it come into Bitcoin, I just think it's, you could get people around the table and have the discussion and the debate. And I think it's become more about their personality and what they want to do than actually what's best for Bitcoin. So that's my main issue with ordinals is this fracturing and this trying to create a new civil war. I think it's totally unnecessary.
So I think you have to separate anti-maximalism, which is the use of divisive tactics against maximalists, maximalism against maximalists is what I call it, from ordinals as a technical protocol that enables us to do new things for Bitcoin and that potentially incentivizes and can accelerate development. You have to separate those two ideas. And I think it's one of the great unfortunate things that has happened is the union of those two things because it didn't have to happen. And I don't think those two things are the same thing. So people who want to use ordinals because they feel like certain parts of the community are doing whatever, to attack those communities, you don't have to support those people to think that ordinals is good for Bitcoin. Those are not similar things. The same way that you can be a Bitcoin maximalist and you can be against the people who are tarring and feathering or doing any sorts of deplorable tactics against people in the crypto industry, calling them shitcoiners or whatever. You don't have to support the behavior of those people either. I'll give you an example, I guess, right? I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. There's a faction of the kind of hard money Bitcoin maximalist community that has made a lot of inroads in the religious communities, right? I'm not a religious person. I have no intent of becoming religious, but I have every, confidence that those people are well-intentioned in what they're doing. They're bringing new people to Bitcoin, and I have no intention of imposing them. I have no interest in doing that. I think the people that they're bringing in are using Bitcoin, right? They're buying, selling Bitcoin. They're hopefully storing money in Bitcoin. They're transacting on the network, and hopefully they're learning about Bitcoin. I would say on the other side, people who are selling NFTs, you started a Bitcoin NFT project you want to go. If the end result of you doing that is that those users are buying and selling Bitcoin, they're starting to divert their savings into Bitcoin, and they're transacting on the network, then I see a comparison. And I see a comparison that one has to come to some sort of moral judgment in order to think one of these is good and one of these are bad. From a technical standpoint, from their actual way that they interface with the network, they are the same. The difference is the NFT people are putting a little bit more data over there, using a little bit of the room on in the database that people are not using, and they're paying extra for it. But otherwise, this resource would have gone to waste, right? The idea that the block, and this I think is an interesting argument, right? And what I was getting to a little bit when I lost my train of thought with the altruism thing, right? In order to think people paying for fees is bad, let's just run that argument to the extreme, right? Let's just say that any transaction that you make on Bitcoin, unless it's 100% necessary, is bad because you want the blockchain to be as small as possible. The extreme version of that argument is that you can only use the blockchain when it's absolutely necessary because we want the absolute minimum amount of transactions in the database. It starts to look very much like an argument, and I made this point on Twitter at one point, about sort of one of these climate change sort of arguments, where it's essentially like, no, using energy is bad, and you should actually try to reduce your energy as much as any energy that you use as a human being should be morally defensible, and we need to have limited energy use from humanity. So it's essentially like an argument that every Bitcoin transaction has to be maximally important, and anything that is increasing that is bad. So you almost get into one of these like deceleration arguments, essentially like, all transactions are bad, therefore you should have no transactions. Is very similar to like, okay, carbon emissions are bad, therefore we should have no cars and people should walk around, right? There's like this extreme element of this idea. So what are those people really arguing? I think that if you really run their argument to the extreme, it's that the total block size matters. Because the total block size matters, like we have to have this immense justification of like which type of transactions are permissible. And the end result of that, I think, is, bypassing the mechanism that Bitcoin actually has for regulating this, which is the fee market. Like if people are willing to pay for fees to put something in the database and those transactions are consensus valid.
No, I get it. I get everything you're saying. I still don't think it's entirely a moral stance. I think sometimes, for me, it's practical.
I think very often it comes across as a moral stance.
For some people,
very often.
Because if you're a money maximalist, you want Bitcoin to be a monetary network, and you want every transaction to be one where it's a monetary transaction, where Bitcoin's being used as a currency, as a form of money. And if that block space is being...
But in a trade where Bitcoin is being traded for a Bitcoin-based NFT, and that trade is priced in Bitcoin, and the person is getting Bitcoin, they are using Bitcoin as a money.
Kinda.
No, they are using Bitcoin as a money.
But not exactly the same. Like what I'm saying is that these use cases, they're creating they're putting other arbitrary data on the blockchain that's running up the fee market. And so it is a skew of what I think some people thought Bitcoin was. It is, you have to change your mental model for what Bitcoin is.
What I was going to transition to talking about, and I think the part that for me is, you asked about the emotional part. I think inhibiting discussion about Bitcoin is in all cases wrong.
Agreed.
And I think the balkanization of the two camps and the lack of conversation, and part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is I think that needs to end.
Yeah, but why do you think that's happened?
I think that has happened because you have ideological entrenchments, and you have two sides that are sort of, I think this is the big concern, right? Is that you have two warring factions that only have the incentives to keep building each other up and keep going to war with each other.
Yeah, but you also have people with just not very good social skills. Different incentives.
I could justify anti-maximalism, right? I've spent a lot of time trying to understand anti-maximalism to really understand like what the relevant critique of it is. And so I could make a steel man argument for anti-maximalism. It's not something I personally support. And to the extent that I have been involved in the anti-maximalist communities, like I appreciate that they've allowed me to be a thoughtful and critical stakeholder. But, from the anti-maximalist point of view, it's essentially, well, the maximalists went out and they created all this arbitrary division in the cryptocurrency community. They started calling all these cryptocurrency people shitcoiners and scammers and whatever. And so now we're just simply using the playbook that they created against them. And as someone who supported Bitcoin toxicity when it came out and stood by as, certain leaders in the Bitcoin community began using that framework, that was something that I, on this show, defended. I defended toxic Bitcoin maximalism because I thought it was ideologically well developed. And I think anti-maximalism similarly simply uses those tactics against the people that created it. And if I supported those people, I also have to support the other people. There's no ideological basis for me to differentiate on those terms. So I really can't be against anti-maximalism. I don't think it's helpful. And I think it's really spoiled the debate around ordinals and it's prevented useful discussion. And I think you can see that because, the real question here is like, if you're an observer, why aren't all the developers against ordinals? Well, the answer is that they've evaluated it. Mm-hmm. They simply think that if we, this might be the best way to accommodate this market demand within Bitcoin. And my point kind of from where I started from is markets barrel towards inconsistency. Markets have to, when something that is unknown, markets will invariably go towards it as fast as possible. And you have a situation right now where the cryptocurrency thesis is materially broken and provably false by just looking at what's happening in the markets. You have a position where the Bitcoin developers want Bitcoin to develop in this direction because they want to continue building Bitcoin. And they see this as a useful, somewhat negative thing in order to accomplish that. And the end result of those two things is that my belief, and this is why I think I became so interested in this at the beginning, is that we as a Bitcoin culture are on a collision course with following this to a conclusion. And what does that conclusion look like? That conclusion looks like a Bitcoin economy that looks very similar to what Ethereum looks like today. And that ultimately is very competitive against these other systems. And that starts to dematerialize them. And essentially, a world where Bitcoin is actively taking markets from other cryptocurrencies, taking stablecoins back, taking DeFi back, taking NFTs back, is what I think the cryptocurrency market collapsing looks like.
Why does Bitcoin need to do that, and why does that cryptocurrency industry need to collapse?
This is why I started with Bitcoin maximalism, right?
Well, let me just throw it in there. Is in that I think they collapse anyway.
Yes, this is why I kind of introduced the point. So the answer of why you care about this is you only care about this if you care about Bitcoin maximalism, right? Because Bitcoin maximalism has to be not just an ideology, and it can't just be a preference. If you just like Bitcoin because you think Bitcoin is the best, and you simply don't want to interface with the rest of the apparatus, you might not be a Bitcoin maximalist. Like a world where certain people in the world, it is best for them to hold their value in like a Tron-based cryptocurrency, where that is the best access to banking that they have, is a world in which some part of that apparatus is valid. And this is why I kind of started with these two frameworks. It's like, I want to see Bitcoin maximalism succeed, and I want to see crypto pluralism fail.
Why? Okay. Let me ask you a different way, because I'm not sure if I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. I only hold Bitcoin. I only use Bitcoin. I have no incentive or any reason to ever use them. I literally once, when I was in Argentina, I bought some Tether. I originally bought it on Ethereum, and I found out
that was a great example, I think, where you started to kind of find the edges of the maximalist thesis, where you're like, okay, well, if we need this cryptocurrency infrastructure in order to have stable coins, then...
Yeah. And then I found out that it was too expensive on Ethereum, so I sent it back to, or in Binance, I swapped it for Tron to send it. And that was the only time I've used it. But generally, and I didn't care. I was happy. I had a use case because I needed to get some American dollars while I was there. But I'm only a Bitcoin user. I keep all my wealth in Bitcoin. I think most of the cryptocurrency market is stupid. I think it's important for it to collapse, but I'm not actively working towards it. So I don't know if I am a maximalist. I don't know. And also, you say there's different types of maximalists. So, like, I get a bit lost. It's like, why? Why do you care? Why do you want that whole infrastructure
Because one of these theses has to be ideologically correct, right? So I think like a world in where there are even two blockchains with real use cases is a world where maximalism like fundamentally doesn't exist. Like maximalism is aspirational. Well, this is an interesting question. I think like maximalism, and then why I think it's very interesting is because remember, I started from a point of being agnostic about cryptocurrencies, right? I didn't really care originally. I started being agnostic. And then I became a crypto pluralist. I was someone who said, okay, all these things exist and they might as well exist and they seem like they're doing different things, whatever. Bitcoin maximalism became interesting to me because it is the big disruptive thesis in the entirety of the stack. If you are fine with crypto pluralism today and you don't care about a world where people are buying and trading NFTs elsewhere, then you might not be a maximalist. I think ultimately Bitcoin maximalism can't just be an ideology. It has to become technically it has to become a technical reality, right?
I can't look if the argument is that Bitcoin maximalism makes the world that ideology makes the world a better place, and crypto pluralism makes the world a worse place. If there's a solid argument for that, I'm a maximalist. But if there's no harm done,
but we live in a world where that is the present state of things.
Yeah.
So if you don't accept the present state of the cryptocurrency apparatus?
No, except it exists.
Okay.
And I just focus all my time on Bitcoin because I think it's the most interesting thing out there. I think it's a great technology.
But you don't.
forward.
But if you don't like tokens and NFTs, then your argument would have to be that you think those things are fundamentally negative for people.
I think they can be negative for people. I think people can be hoodwinked into thinking this is a good thing to get involved in and lose a shit ton of money. And I think they can ultimately go and because I think that the main argument and use case and thesis for things like ordinals or NFTs is to flip and make money. I don't think people are sat there going, oh, look at my great collection of ordinals. I need to get a copy of my ordinal up on the... I just don't think they're doing it. It's always about when do I flip it and make more money? And most people, I think, will lose.
Right.
So I think that
but I think there's nothing about ordinals being good for Bitcoin that invalidates that thesis, just like there's nothing about you being critical of the El Salvadoran government or being critical of BlackRock.
Yeah. No, but I go back, like, what's the argument for maximalism? Like, what is it for?
Well, the argument for maximalism, I think, is this idea that, you as a Bitcoin owner and person who owns this hard money, right? Yeah. Like, the idea is that money goes up over time and the full kind of representation of what is economically possible accrues to those holders.
If it accelerates the end goal of Bitcoin, which we can debate what it is, but if it accelerates the end goal, then I'm a maximalist.
Right. And I think the point is that I've been trying to make is that I think ordinals accelerates our end goal. It does it in a very interesting way. And I think that it's not immediately intuitive. And I think what you'll find that's very interesting if you talk to both camps is that they'll often say the same things like in different ways, right? Like, so Bitcoin maximalists who are more on the hard money side will say, okay, well, all tokens are going to zero. And the ordinals people who are pro tokens will say like, yes, we agree. Like all these tokens will go to zero. And so they will agree.
So what I will say is I'd probably just in this conversation become more pro ordinals. Like I think I've been able to pick out the relevant parts of the argument to go, okay, yeah, I'm more pro ordinals because it advances the case of Bitcoin.
I think what I would invite people to consider at home is that they have an extreme emotional reaction to ordinals. They might want to take a more dispassionate look at it, and they might want to consider removing their personal reactions for things that they don't like. Look, I get it. Like a world where Bitcoin starts to look more like Solana is a world where Bitcoin looks less special.
Yeah.
And the fear of that part of the movement is that, yes, we will turn Bitcoin into just another thing that's like Ethereum.
Yeah.
But okay, you have to understand that if Bitcoin's incentives are correct and if Bitcoin works, then Bitcoin will ultimately bring all those people towards those incentives anyway. That Bitcoin is strong enough and works well enough to take on that challenge and to succeed against those obstacles.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I get it. Like I said, I started very indifferent. I mean, there's a complete inconsistency in my tweets towards it. I mean, Zach Vole called me out on it. Because I was like, I was against ordinals. I was like, I don't care about it. I've just remained indifferent to the whole thing. Again, all I say is the higher fees are annoying at a time when I don't want them. And they're annoying to people who've tried to do good work, who've been out there to developing countries and they're trying to expand Bitcoin. These higher fees have caused problems, and they have.
But we have to live in a world where there are higher. I think most of the Bitcoin development community agrees that we have to prepare for a world in which Bitcoin fees are high. Like look what they're talking about. One of the big technical conversations right now is around UTXO sharing, right? This idea that you as a Bitcoin user in a world where 8 billion people are using it won't even be able to hold your own UTXO because there simply isn't. In order to scale to that level, this is what we will need to do.
Yeah.
So we need to start, if you are serious about getting the developing world onto Bitcoin, you have to start looking at building these structures. And I think the argument from the ordinal side is that if you look at what the Ethereum Solana complex has done in terms of funding that development, it is substantially at a higher clip than what the Bitcoin the Bitcoin development community has been able to afford to do.
Yeah.
Because you have to accept that, look, if you're not, it's great to be ideological and ideologically motivated, altruistically motivated. That's great. But, we could also do a lot with these resources to create the kinds of things that we need to create to actually succeed on these things, right? Because there isn't a world where the entire continent of Africa uses Lightning for low-cost P2P payments in their economies. That isn't a world because the sum economic activity of that would put free pressure on Bitcoin anyway, and it would raise fees to the point where some of that economic activity might be prohibitive.
Yeah, and it comes down to this issue we have of like this, we have a decentralized view of what Bitcoin is. We have a decentralized view of how Bitcoin should work. We have a decentralized way of educating it and spreading adoption. And so, what I think Bitcoin is or should be may be different from you, may be different from Anita. And when we go out and we have all these different experiences, we meet different people, and we're all trying to do different things. And what that leads is to when there's a fundamental shift in Bitcoin, which we're having now, that has some collateral damage because it's like, oh, Bitcoin maybe wasn't that, it's now this. And there is an impact. So I'm not bothered about the ordinals discussion. I'm happy to have it, but I'm also going to say, okay, where's the collateral damage? Because there is collateral damage. Okay, and what is the impact? And what do we do about
a dynamic system that is changing will always change, right? So it's,
But there's impact. So what is that impact and what does that mean? What does this now mean for, anyone we have been trying to onboard in Africa?
It's going to dramatically complicate the ways that we have used to onboard people in the past, and it will force us to find new ways to make those arguments and to accommodate the needs of those people. But I think the particular negative emotional reaction to that is short-sighted because it doesn't accept the reality that is the present course that we were on anyway. We have to go down that path and are going down that path.
Yeah, it's just come a bit sooner than some people expected, and there is some collateral damage.
And that's why I think in a best case scenario, the people in the technical Bitcoin development community who are more positive to ordinals, that is what they see as they see an accelerant and a catalyst that could drive economically the amount of kind of resources we need to kind of develop the things that we think we need to build.
This was what John Carvalho said. He said, look, the best thing to come out of ordinals is that it's accelerated the high fee environment for us to understand what that means.
100%. And I 100% agree with John about this. And I've appreciated that he's been, as he is in the conversation about it. But I think that the reason I presented this argument as such today is because I think there's been this arbitrary gridlock between the camps that I don't understand.
Yeah, I do. I can, as somebody who's done 800 interviews, I can tell you exactly why it's happening. I'll tell you exactly why.
Audience capture, which is ironically the thing that you've been against.
Audience capture, narcissism, lack of social skills, ego. It's all these different, it's Twitter. It's it's for some people, it's winning the argument. And
100%.
There's a certain group of people who are more interested in publicly humiliating people. Like someone like Udi, he clearly gets off publicly humiliating people. And what can you do with something like that? You can't do anything with someone. You can't sit down and say, let's have a conversation about this. It's bullshit. I've interviewed pretty much everyone in Bitcoin, right? I've met nearly everyone. And I can tell you who you can have a rational conversation with and who you can't. Udi on the conversation, waste of fucking time. Eric Wall, maybe a little bit. Maybe you can have a conversation with him. And so if you want, if your point that you're bringing to this table, this conversation is, we need to break this. Okay, you need to just find who the adults are in the room to have this conversation, because you can make solid arguments. You can have good discussions, good debates. That's not a problem. You can do that. You just have to get the adults in the room.
I think you're putting an unnecessarily negative onus on certain people, and you're using that as for every person who is extreme on one side, there is someone on the other side who is
I
as
can name
extreme.
them as well. I'm not worried about naming
But there's a very strong deference to this other previous kind of like monoculture. And I think that I have been personally disappointed by what I see as like a number of people like kind of in the just Bitcoin media space in general who just aren't ideologically exploring this out of fear. And I think that culture is highly negative.
Who's not exploring this out of fear?
Name a conversation that has happened about this that has been in any way rational that you've seen on any of the many kind of programs that we have.
When have we done it?
We had Rob Hamilton.
In February of
Eric
2023.
Yeah. Do you think I've avoided it?
100%.
Okay.
I think that's more of lack of interest.
Yeah, lack of interest. Like the reason we've not covered it is I kind of don't care. I don't care about ordinals, and I don't care about the war. I don't care about the fight.
But do you really care about like theology, like in like anarchism?
Let me just finish. I just don't care. Where we've been going with the work we've been doing is traveling to failed states or countries that are fucked and trying to understand what's going on in these countries and what money is important to them. And at no point have I ever thought, do you know what the people in Malawi need? They need dick butts.
But nobody's making that argument.
No. But what I'm saying is, like, I'm making a joke to make a point. I'm a monetary maximalist because I'm spending time looking at countries where money's fucked. This is the first time I've had a conversation where somebody's made a rational argument to me that you have. I've gone, okay, I can understand the point you're making. I think they're all fucking stupid. I think they're all a waste of time. But yes, we've accelerated the understanding of what a high fee environment looks like. Yes, we can lead to more development. Okay, I'm more interested now.
Do you think the NFT market accelerated the adoption of cryptocurrency broadly? Do you think the fact that celebrities commonly own NFTs was helped adoption?
Look, I think it was. I think it's a red herring. I think yes, there's a blip, it's a fad, and it went away, and it doesn't fundamentally change anything. It's like to me, it's just a blip. It's like it's a fad.
I find that the arguments
they're like Tamagotchis. Just like whatever. And so, if you think we've avoided it, we haven't. We've had it. We've had the discussions. I just find it fundamentally uninteresting.
I think that there has been a tremendous like freezing over of this conversation, and then there has been a tremendous deference, I think, to.
But you're making the accusation that it's done because there's a fear of having the conversation, and I think you think I've been scared to have it because I'm worried about the impact.
I think like I've made that comment generally. I think as a culture we've been scared.
Let's be as clear as possible. I've never been scared about talking to anyone about any fucking subject on this podcast at all. We've had everyone. We've literally had everyone, and we've taken every shot that's come at us. I promise you, if I've not covered ordinals, it's for two reasons. One, I don't find the subject that interesting. Two, the people I see mainly talking about ordinals, present company not included, I think are fucking idiots. And the way they do it, they come across as idiots. And the way they try and justify it, and the way they try and attack people and cause division, I think they're idiots. But I am willing to have the conversation. If you say, no, this person's worth talking to, great, I'll sit down and talk to them.
Well, look, I think Ordinals is a tremendous disruption to the entire like cryptocurrency framework. And I think that we will, are just scratching the surface and how that will play out. And I think, my worry is that people are going to be blindsided by what's going to happen. Because I think that...
What is going to happen?
You're going to see a tremendous, if you cannot stop something, and the end result of a market in cryptocurrency is that it will accelerate to the breaking point, then what do you think will happen? Then the natural result of those things is they will accelerate to the point at which they top out. This is how every market in cryptocurrency...
What does that mean?
That means that the next market cycle will be defined by pushing these certain technologies to the extreme.
What does that mean? What's to the extreme?
This entire conversation has been meant about tracing it. It means tremendous capital inflow into Bitcoin from people who have not been aligned with Bitcoin. It means people coming to Bitcoin with ideas that have traditionally not been accepted with Bitcoin and receiving a lot of funding for those ideas. And it means the marketing of certain tools, use cases of cryptocurrency in the name of Bitcoin that Bitcoiners do not like.
Do you think this therefore is going to lead us to a similar civil war? Do you think that there will be an acceleration of the idea of like censoring these and hard forking?
What I worry about is that the anti-ordinals crowd, again, like I've I've talked, I think, around this enough. I think that there is a danger in having a static mental model of Bitcoin. There's a real danger in thinking that because you are attached to a certain idea of what Bitcoin is, Bitcoin needs to conform to that. And I think that it's very interesting to me that the people who are claiming that the Ordinals people want to fork Bitcoin are the most vocal about taking tactics and paths that would potentially lead to forking Bitcoin.
Yeah, your avoidance of using names and actually detailing where this is happening makes it a bit harder. If you're like, are you avoiding doing that on purpose because you don't want to trigger things? You don't want people getting in touch with you?
So there was one name that I mentioned in this podcast, which was Casey Rotemar, who I think we need to talk about more.
Yeah, we should get him on the show.
And I think that I'm trying to describe what these groups want, because I don't think it's helpful to single people out, right? Like when you use UDI as an example for, an ideology, like UDI stands for a group of people who understand, who see something in a certain way. And if you don't make an attempt to empathize with that, then you will just reject what he's saying. But that is what the cryptocurrency community has done to Bitcoin.
No, it's not
yes,
that. It's
it 100% is.
It just isn't that.
It's 100%.
No.
That's the same reason why the cryptocurrency people reject the maximalists, because they look at them as people who just do, they're UDIs, but for that, they're just, 100%.
Yeah, but you can't answer for me. I can only answer for myself. It isn't that. Like, I've seen this.
Do you want me to give you the steel man for UDI?
If you want.
Okay. His argument.
By the way, he's going to be loving this because he's like, this bit that shows about me. He's going to do a tweet about it. He's going to share the video out. He's going to say laser minds maxis. And then he's going to be like coming in his pants. He's just the same old bullshit.
I mean, but that's why I avoided talking about it. But I think that, again, why I'm not against anti-maximalism is I think that there are people in the Bitcoin space who think that the antagonism and harassment and negative tactics we've taken towards the crypto world, right? We have been very mean to those people.
Yeah.
They are more likely to come back to Bitcoin if they think that there's some sort of emotional reason that they can get back at those people who have wronged them. So there is a bit of calculism here where it's a feint. You're looking at it for face value, but the argument isn't the face value. The argument is there are people who aren't comfortable associating with Bitcoin because we have made them uncomfortable to associate with Bitcoin. So anti-maximalism is about using the tactics that maximalists have used to create that division against them for the benefit of the people who were excluded because of them. And so because they are ultimately the same tool set applied for different reasons, I don't think that there is an intellectual argument that one can support one of these and not the other.
I think they all come back to Bitcoin anyway.
Agree. Yeah.
Without ordinals, they all come back to Bitcoin. I think everybody eventually comes back to Bitcoin. That's why I don't care to...
but like, again, like you have to quantify this is why I asked the question of like, what do you expect these people to do?
I don't care what they do.
But you have to game theoretically think about this.
No, I don't.
They're not going to wave Andreessen Horowitz isn't going to go out tomorrow. They're not going to wave the white flag. They're not going to shut down their crypto operation, and they're not going to roll that fund into spot Bitcoin.
But
that's not going to happen.
But I don't care.
It's not going to happen. Okay, but then
fuck Andreessen. Honestly, fuck them. Fuck all their investment. Fuck all these people. I don't care. Like personally, I don't care. What I care about is what do I care about for me? I want to hold Bitcoin because it protects my value over time and protects my family. I want to be able to send it. I want to be able to receive it. And that's all I want to do. And that to me is a great use case for me.
I don't think Ordinals should be threatening your worldview. If that's your worldview, then I don't think they're threatening.
But I've managed to carry on doing that while ignoring Ordinals. And I can carry on doing that while ignoring Ordinals. Now, look, based on this conversation, we're going to pay more attention to it because no. Like, I'm also saying you've had an impact here. I'm going to pay more attention to it because we clearly need to. But I don't care about these people. These people who rejected Bitcoin and they got called scammers or whatever because they were creating shit coins and minting tokens and whatever. I just don't care about them. And I don't care about trying to get them to come back. I think they come back anyway. They come back because of the principles of Bitcoin monetary maximalism are correct. That's my personal
and I think there's
view.
this like tremendous and this is why I really just don't agree with this. I think there's been this I don't expect anyone to give me an apology. And if you are a Bitcoin maximalist who thinks that somebody who has been wrong to us, like is if you think there's a world where people apologize to us, let me just tell you right now, they're not going to do that.
Who's looking for an apology?
There are a lot of people who are looking for apologies for people.
Are you? Don't care.
All right, okay.
Yeah, the thing about monetary maximalism for me, just speak from a personal point of view, is that Bitcoin has done exactly what I need money to do for me in the last 6 years of my life. And it's fundamentally changed the future of mine and my family's life because of the fundamental monetary properties of Bitcoin. And that's why I'm a monetary maximalist, because then when I go around the world and I go to fucking Malawi and I go to Nairobi and I think these people also need very good money. Now, you've made a solid argument
Well,
that Ordinals accelerates that. Cool, I'm in.
I would say counter argument to this. Most people who have become Bitcoin maximalists were exposed in some way to the cryptocurrency apparatus. To deny the path that they took through that,
I took that path.
Everyone did.
Yeah.
Every Bitcoin maximalist went that path. Trying to create an alternate adoption path may not be worthwhile.
What do you mean create an alternative?
Trying to create an alternative adoption path to speculation, disappointment, and adoption
I agree.
may not be worthwhile.
I agree. I've literally given up trying to recruit people into Bitcoin. Like I may occasionally chat to somebody, they go, what do you do? And I say Bitcoin, I get them download wallet Satoshi, send them a bit of Bitcoin, see what happens. But I think there's an inevitability with Bitcoin and it's happening. Its adoption is happening and it's from one person to one person telling them or a bit of media or an ETF or what, it's just going to happen. I don't care about having a go at shitcoiners anymore and I don't care about trying to get them back into Bitcoin. I don't care about apologizing to anyone. I just see this natural path of, I'm such a monetary maximalist in not on the technology side. Again, I don't care about ordinals. I just think the fundamental properties of Bitcoin work and it brings everyone to Bitcoin. So I'm just like, everything else doesn't matter. I think Bitcoin will succeed,
right,
whatever.
But if we know that the Bitcoin's incentives win over time, but the longer that you're exposed to Bitcoin, the more aligned with Bitcoin you become, and this is something that I really, truly, firmly believe, then any exposure to Bitcoin in any way is justifiable.
Fine, yeah.
Okay.
But that's why, again, that goes back to I'm just indifferent. I've been indifferent about ordinals. See, this is the point I'm trying to get across to you. I think there is an indifference. I think there's a large indifference to it. It's a bit like US politics. It looks like the right are fighting with the left.
How many episodes have you done on US politics? Like, come on.
No, but bear with me. There's a large part of US politics where it looks like the right are fighting with the left all the time. And actually, there's a very large, indifferent group of people just...
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I think this is the same.
Well, I think that the indifferent middle is actually a little bit different. And I think to the extent that like the monetary maximalists, I think, are disappointed or sort of upset about things, I think they're going to find that the middle people, like this great middle, the people who aren't ideological, the person who just works a 9-to-5 job, is 23 years old and is on crypto Twitter all day, they're here to have fun and make money. And they will ultimately follow whatever version of that makes them feel the best about holding Bitcoin. And that improves their daily life. And I think that if it is true that we live in this collapse of the Cantillon effect, that we Bitcoiners see the future, there's a great messy middle going forward. And I think that we've underestimated and refused to accept just how long that process is going to take. And a process that uses some of these tactics that have been successful and that other cryptocurrencies have used, I don't think we should be prohibiting ourselves from using them. That would be the argument that I would make.
Yeah, but no one's stopping people do that either.
That's why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think, though, this is often where the argument, I think, really gets very convoluted, is that this is happening now. Like, whether you want it or not, ordinals exist. People are buying rare sats. The prices are going up. They're only going to be getting rare because of Bitcoins are only getting rarer. These NFTs aren't going to stop. Those markets are going to support it. These Bitcoin tokens that are shitcoins, they're just as much shitcoin as any other shitcoin.
I think they're all kind of fads, really. I think they're mainly fads. And I think eventually it goes away. But that's just my view. Where are you in all this? Have you changed during this interview at all?
No, I don't think so. I think I don't agree that they're spam. I don't think that anyone should be trying to control what goes into a block. I mean, it's permissionless money. They're doing stuff without permission. I'm totally fine with that.
Why do you think we've not covered it much?
I find, because like I think
We weren't to have Rodamore, were we?
yeah, we were. He ended up dropping out. We
Yeah.
had Junseth on
There you
covering
go.
it a little bit as well.
Yeah, so he pulled out of coming on us. So there you go.
Well, yeah.
as long as
Do you
they're
know
not
why
breaking
though?
consensus rules,
Like,
who
I mean,
cares?
he recanted from the community. Like, I mean,
Okay, well, that's his choice. I mean, well, I can't do anything about
I
that.
was greatly disappointed. I think that vacuum allowed certain people to take control of the Ordinals narrative, and that has been very detrimental.
I think it was when didn't the sort of count get fucked up at some point, and it was like as that was happening, and I think it.
No, there was so much personal attacks and animosity thrown at him. I mean,
But I mean, they're consensus transactions. Like, who cares?
If Jesus came back to Earth, he would be shot.
I think there are a lot of people who seem to care, and the question is, why do they care, and where do they want
I think
Bitcoin
there's
to
a
go?
few people care, and they're very vocal.
Yeah, I think it's, and I think the amount of people who love it and the amount of people who hate it on either side are very small.
But if you take it to like the logical extreme of like what happens if you don't like it, and you then have to have like a committee of people that decide on what's like a valid, a suitable transaction, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that is. Do you know what I think the interesting thing is? And yeah, let's bring the ETFs into it. I think one of the biggest struggles that a lot of Bitcoiners are going to have is that Bitcoin adoption scales infinitely faster than Bitcoin ideology. And so what ends up happening is you'll end up having little to no ideology or small subsets of ideology.
Well, my argument is Bitcoin maximalism can't be an ideology. It has to, in a world where hyper Bitcoinization happens, Bitcoin maximalism doesn't exist.
Well, Bitcoin's just money. It's just money.
Well, no, because the goal has been achieved.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I think we're accelerating into that. And I think there's going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions of people who suddenly own Bitcoin or Bitcoin exposure.
But there's a fundamental
Rizzo, let me finish. There's going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions of people either owning Bitcoin exposure over the next cycle, 2 cycles. And I don't think they're going to know of or care of ideological camps in Bitcoin. I just think there's probably technical arguments about iPhone development that none of us know about. There's probably ideological arguments about 3G towers we don't know shit about.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it will just be that.
Yeah, but my argument, I think, is that ultimately, if there's a world where you're still using PayPal USD over Ethereum, and Bitcoin, is still going up and is still useful money, and Bitcoin maximalism fails, you're in a world of crypto pluralism, right? People are using other cryptocurrencies for other things, and they will continue to exist. And the ideological basis that we have to oppose that apparatus will continue to go down, and ultimately we'll have an ideology that isn't represented in technology. We have to we have to reach a technological supremacy. Bitcoin maximalism can't stay as an ideology. If it stays as an ideology, it won't realize what the goal is, because the goal is to ultimately subsume everything that is possible with cryptocurrencies into the network for the benefit of people who own Bitcoin. Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah, but I'm with you. Hyper-Bitcoinization ends Bitcoin ideologies, like maximalism ideology. I just think it evaporates. It becomes, and then you still have these niche communities, but I think it's kind of, we're in the process of that.
But don't you worry that there are some people who hate crypto more than they love Bitcoin?
Yeah, but again, they will eventually come back. Everyone eventually will realize that fiat money sucks and Bitcoin is the best form of money. You get there eventually. And it's like that.
But my question was they hate crypto more than they love Bitcoin.
Yeah, but I think they see them as the same thing. And I think there's...
No, you're talking about like Bitcoin maximum.
I think there is a large number of people in the last cycle who onboarded to Bitcoin partly for the ideology, but I think they wanted to feel morally superior to the shitcoiners.
Sure, but what is that relevant to?
And why does that matter?
Like, if we're thinking long-term, hyper-Bitcoinization, why does it matter? Who cares?
Because it prevents us as a culture from assimilating useful tactics and technology created by that other culture, and it prohibits conversation about it.
Well, look, this is the place where one of the places where the conversations can happen, and one of the widest reaching places. So tell us what the conversation needs to happen, we'll make them happen.
I think I've laid out my case. I appreciate you hearing it. I'm incredibly excited about this opportunity because I think that, again, it's so disruptive to so many people's worldviews about what cryptocurrency is. I don't think we can. I mean, how can you not be excited about that direction and figuring out what we can now achieve and what can happen. I don't know. To me, I think it's, maybe I'll quote somebody else. CK Corollas will always say, like, you're not bullish enough. I don't know. If you can't be bullish about the crypto industrial complex collapsing into Bitcoin for the benefit of Bitcoin.
Industrial complex. I love that.
If you can't be bullish about that, then what are we talking about? Like, I don't know.
Well, listen, I say again, you've shifted me into my thinking or me wanting to think about this more than any other conversation about it. Every other time I was like, I just found it boring. Now you've put together a solid case for me to think about this more and talk about it more. And I was definitely on the fuck ordinals, they're annoying, I wish they'd go away. Now I'm like, okay, that's a fair point. So look, we'll cover it.
I think you should be bullish on there being another culture in Bitcoin that wants to promote Bitcoin that may not be negative for Bitcoin and that you can have nothing to do with.
And if all that's correct, if all those line up as correct statements, I'm in.
Sure.
All right. Rizzo, always good to see you. Do you want to send anyone anywhere?
You follow me on Twitter at Pete_Rizzo_. I shitpost about Bitcoin history.
Yeah, man. By the way, we were talking about that before you came in.
Okay.
When did you start doing that? Was it about 2 years ago? You started doing the constant history?
The daily kind of history post. Yeah, it was like mid 2022. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. It's like one of my favorite things on Twitter.
Oh, love that.
Yeah,
awesome.
So well done on that. All right, bro. Thank you.